Easter is usually about family gatherings, pastel colors, and warm spring days. But sometimes, hidden behind all that cheer, there's something darker waiting to be found. The following 3 stories were sent in by people who experienced unsettling and downright terrifying events on Easter weekend. These aren't just creepy campfire tales, they're real accounts that still haunt the people who live them. So settle in, keep your doors locked, and remember, just because it's a holiday doesn't mean you're safe. I was maybe 8 or 9 when this happened, and to this day, Easter always feels a little tainted because of it. My family wasn't overly religious, but Easter Sunday was still a big deal. We'd get up early, go to the morning service, then stick around for the egg hunt the church hosted afterward. It was one of the few days of the year I actually looked forward to going to church. Our church had a pretty simple setup. The main sanctuary was upstairs, and the basement was where all the classrooms, storage rooms, and the kitchen were. The basement also had its own exit, a heavy green metal door at the far end of the hall, which led out to the parking lot. I'd been told dozens of times never to use it unless it was an emergency. Apparently, it locked behind you automatically, so if you went out without a key, you'd be stuck outside. That Easter morning, the service ran longer than usual. I remember fidgeting in my seat and glancing at the basket of plastic. Eggs the ushers had set on the altar for the kids. After church, my mom dropped me off at the basement classroom for Sunday school while she and my dad stayed upstairs to help with decorations. The basement was decorated for Easter pastel streamers, construction paper cutouts of bunnies and crosses taped to the walls, and even a giant cardboard egg in the hallway. The teachers had gone all out. I was coloring a picture of Jesus by the tomb when I realized I needed to use the bathroom. The bathrooms were at the very end of the hall, right before the green exit door. My teacher waved me out without a second thought. I don't know why I noticed it, but as I walked down the hall, I realized it was strangely quiet. Normally you'd hear other kids laughing or the muffled sound of teachers talking, but all I could hear was the faint hum of the lights overhead. I went into the boys' bathroom, which was small, just 2 stalls and a sink. I picked the stall closest to the wall, closed the door, and sat down. Halfway through, I heard a slow, metallic scraping sound. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was from the stall next to mine. At first, I thought it was just someone moving around, but the sound was too deliberate, long, uneven drags, like something heavy was being scraped against the inside of the stall door. My stomach tightened. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, frozen. The sound stopped for a few seconds. Then I heard a faint creak, followed by the stall door next to mine swinging open. When I finished and stepped out to wash my hands, I glanced in the mirror. My heart almost stopped. Standing behind me, halfway in the stall doorway, was a man wearing an Easter bunny costume. It wasn't the cheerful, bright white bunny costume you'd see at a store. This one was dingy, the fur stained in patches, and one of the ears flopped limply to the side. The mask's eyes looked uneven, like one had been reattached wrong. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me through the mesh in the mask. For some reason, I didn't scream. I think being a kid, my brain just tried to make it normal. I even smiled a little and said, "Hi." He stepped forward slowly and lifted a hand, pointing toward the green exit door. His voice came through muffled and low. "Come on. I've got a special egg for you outside." I was young enough to think this might be part of some church surprise. Without hesitation, I started walking toward the door. He followed close behind me, his costume's feet making dull thuds against the floor. When I pushed the door open, a wave of cold air hit me. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few cars, and off in the corner near the dumpster I saw a dark-colored van with its side door cracked open. I didn't notice at first, but there was another person in an Easter bunny costume standing near the van. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I stopped walking and turned back toward the church. The man in the costume behind me stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. That's when I heard it, a sharp, panicked shout from across the lot. Hey. I looked over and saw one of the Sunday school teachers, Mrs. Delaney, sprinting toward us. She had this terrified look on her face. The man let go of me instantly and bolted for the van. The other bunny climbed inside and the van sped off, disappearing around the corner in seconds. Mrs. Delaney grabbed me by the shoulders, asking if I was okay. I remember trying to explain, telling her about the second bunny and the special egg, but she was already pulling me back toward the door. She locked it behind us. The police came later. They asked me to describe the van and the costumes. I told them as much as I could remember, but it wasn't much. There were no reports of missing kids that day, so they didn't have much to go on. The scariest part? The officers told my parents the man must have had a key to the green door. And the only people who had keys were staff and volunteers. I still think about what would have happened if Mrs. Delaney hadn't been in the parking lot right then. I don't think I'd be here to tell the story. This happened when I was 17, the year before I graduated high school. In our town, there was a local tradition on the Saturday night before Easter. People would gather at the old McKinley orchard for a huge nighttime egg hunt. It wasn't for little kids, it was a teenage thing. The eggs had candy, cash, or slips you could redeem for prizes. The place was pitch black except for a few lanterns strung along the main path, so you needed a flashlight to find anything. I'd gone the year before with friends, and it was a blast. The orchard itself was big rows of apple trees, a crumbling barn near the back, and a dirt lot where everyone parked. The McKinley family had stopped farming years ago, but they still let the event happen as a fundraiser for the youth center. That year, it was me, my best friend Tyler, and two others from school, Cam and Lavra. We showed up just after 9 p.m., paid the $5 entry, and grabbed our maps. The rules were simple. Stay inside the orchard boundaries. Don't take other people's flashlights, and no climbing the trees. Once the whistle blew, we split into pairs, me and Tyler together, Cam and Lavra heading off in another direction. Tyler had this insane plan to search the far side of the orchard near the fence, because nobody ever goes that far. I agreed, mostly because the closer sections were already crawling with people. It was colder than I expected that night. Our breath fogged up in our flashlight beams as we crunched over the dead leaves. We found a couple of eggs tucked under roots and in low branches, but nothing big. After about 15 minutes, the chatter and laughter of the crowd had faded, replaced by the sound of wind rattling through the branches. We were halfway down one of the back rows when we both froze. Somewhere ahead in the dark, we heard movement, not quick, like someone walking, slow, deliberate, the sound of grass and leaves shifting under slow, heavy steps. Tyler clicked his flashlight toward the sound, but the beam didn't reach far enough. We figured it might be another hunter, so we called out, "Hey, you find anything?" No answer. Then we saw a light. Not a flashlight beam, a dim, flickering glow between the trees, like from a candle or lantern. Tyler whispered, "Maybe it's one of the volunteers," but something about it felt off. The light swayed gently, moving sideways between the rows. We followed it for a minute or two, but it stayed the same distance ahead of us. No matter how fast we walked, we couldn't seem to close the gap. Finally, the glow stopped near the edge of the orchard. That's when we saw the person holding it. They were standing completely still between two trees, wearing what looked like a long, white robe that hung to their ankles. The hood was pulled up over their head, and they held a small lantern close to their chest. I remember feeling this weird, prickling chill even though they hadn't done anything. Tyler muttered, "That's not a volunteer?" The figure slowly lifted their free hand and made a motion, not waving, not beckoning, but pointing directly at us. We didn't move. Then from somewhere to our left, another lantern lit up, and another to the right. 3 people now, in a wide arc, all dressed the same way, all facing us. I whispered to Tyler that we needed to leave. He didn't argue. We turned and started walking back the way we came, keeping our lights low. I glanced over my shoulder maybe 10 seconds later. The 3 figures were walking after us. Not running, just walking. But their pace was steady, and it was enough to make my stomach knot. We didn't bother being quiet anymore. Tyler muttered, "Screw this," and we broke into a jog. When I looked back again, the lantern lights had disappeared, but that didn't make me feel better. We didn't stop moving until we heard the sound of other voices ahead and saw the glow of the main orchard path. We blended back into the crowd without telling anyone what happened. An hour later, when the hunt was over, we found Cam and Lavra near the parking lot. They were pale and jumpy. Cam told us they'd seen someone hiding behind the barn, not with a flashlight or a lantern, just watching them from the shadows. When they got too close, the person turned and walked into the trees. I don't know who those people were or why they were out there dressed like that, but I haven't been back to the McKinley Orchard since. When I was 21, I had just moved back to my hometown after a couple of years away at college. That Easter Sunday, my mom convinced me to join her for the early morning church service, followed by breakfast with my grandparents in the next town over. It was one of those rare April mornings that feel more like winter than spring. The sky was pale and overcast, and a thin mist clung to the edges of the road as I drove. The plan was simple. I'd meet my mom at the church, follow her to breakfast afterward, then head home. But halfway there, she called to say she'd be late and to just go ahead without her. She'd meet me at my grandparents' place. That meant I was now driving alone on the back roads just after sunrise. These weren't well-maintained highways. They were narrow, cracked asphalt routes lined with empty fields and patches of dense woods. About 10 minutes into the drive, I came around a bend and saw something odd in the distance. There was a figure standing on the shoulder of the road. At first, I thought it might be a jogger or a farmer heading to work, but as I got closer, I realized they were standing completely still. They were wearing a giant rabbit costume. Not the cartoonish, friendly Easter bunny kind, but one of those older, thrift store versions with matted fur and glassy, vacant eyes. The head of the costume was tilted slightly to the side, and the person's arms hung limply at their sides. I slowed down without even realizing it. Something about the way they were just watching the road made my skin crawl. As I passed, I kept my eyes straight ahead, but I could feel their gaze following me. For a second, I thought about pulling over to take a picture. Maybe it was just some weird small-town prank, but I decided against it. I pressed the gas a little harder and tried to shake it off. About 5 minutes later, I reached a four-way stop. I glanced in my rearview mirror and froze. The figure in the rabbit costume was standing at the corner behind me. There was no way they could have walked there that fast. The roads out here were surrounded by empty farmland. There were no shortcuts, no parallel streets. Yet there they were, in the exact same pose, head tilted, arms at their sides. I didn't wait to see if they moved. I ran the stop sign and drove another few miles until I reached a cluster of houses. When I finally got to my grandparents' place, I went inside and tried to laugh it off when they asked why I looked rattled. But the image of that rabbit stayed with me all morning. Later, on my drive back home, I took the highway instead of the back roads. Still, when I passed the turnoff that led back toward that route, I glanced down it. And there, far in the distance, in the same spot I'd first seen them, was the rabbit, standing perfectly still. If these stories prove anything, it's that danger doesn't take a holiday. Whether it's an empty house with something lurking inside, a stranger with intentions you'll never understand, or a figure in a rabbit costume that shouldn't exist where it does. The unsettling truth is that some Easters are remembered for all the wrong reasons. If you've had your own disturbing experience during a holiday, I'd like to hear it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and goodbye.